How to think in English. When I first moved to New York City, I was filled with excitement. I had always dreamed of living in a city that never sleeps, surrounded by skyscrapers, bustling streets, and endless opportunities. But within weeks, my excitement turned into frustration. My biggest obstacle wasn't the subway system, the fast-paced lifestyle, or the high cost of living. It was the language barrier. I had studied English back home and thought I was prepared. But as soon as I arrived, I realized how wrong I was. Every conversation felt like a battle. I couldn't keep up with the speed of native speakers, and I constantly found myself translating every word in my head. At first, I tried to get by with the little English I knew. I would mentally translate from my native language to English before speaking. But this process was painfully slow, and by the time I managed to say something, the conversation had usually moved on. I struggled to order food, ask for directions, or even make small talk. Worst of all, I felt isolated. Making friends seemed impossible when I couldn't express myself freely. The struggles of translating. My habit of translating every word made everything harder. It was like carrying a heavy backpack everywhere I went. Instead of understanding sentences as a whole, I would break them down, translate each word, and then piece them back together. This made conversations awkward and stressful. At job interviews, my lack of fluency cost me opportunities. Employers wanted someone who could communicate confidently, but I couldn't deliver. My answers sounded robotic, and I often used the wrong words. I remember one interview where I was asked about my strengths. I spent so much time translating that I gave an incomplete answer, and the interviewer just moved on. Socially, things weren't any better. I avoided group settings because I couldn't keep up with the fast pace of conversations. I felt like an outsider, even when surrounded by people. After months of struggling, I started to resent New York. The city that everyone praised felt cold and unwelcoming to me. Realizing the problem, one day a colleague gave me some honest advice. She said, "You're making it too complicated. Stop translating and start thinking in English." Her words stuck with me. I realized that my habit of translating was the root of my problem. I needed to train my brain to think directly in English, but I had no idea how to start. I began researching methods to stop translating and improve my fluency. I discovered that thinking in English isn't just about learning new vocabulary or grammar rules. It's about rewiring the way your brain processes language. Slowly but surely, I started to implement some strategies that changed everything for me. Steps to think in English. Here are the methods I used to train my brain to think in English. If you're facing the same struggles, these steps might help you too. 1. Immerse yourself in English. Immersion is one of the most effective ways to start thinking in English. I surrounded myself with the language in every way possible. I changed my phone and computer settings to English, started watching TV shows and movies without subtitles, and listened to podcasts during my commute. At first, it was overwhelming, but over time, my brain started to recognize patterns and phrases. 2. Describe your day in English. I began narrating my day in English. For example, while brushing my teeth, I would think, "I'm brushing my teeth on my way to work." I'd say to myself, "I see a red car," or "the weather is cold today." This simple exercise forced me to practice thinking in English regularly, even when I wasn't talking to anyone. 3. Label your surroundings. To expand my vocabulary, I labeled items around my apartment with sticky notes. My refrigerator, microwave, and even my mirror had labels with their English names. Seeing these words every day helped me associate the English word directly with the object, rather than translating from my native language. 4. Use a monolingual dictionary. I stopped using bilingual dictionaries and switched to a monolingual English dictionary. This forced me to understand words in English instead of relying on translations. It was challenging at first, but it helped me think more in English. 5. Talk to yourself. I started having conversations with myself in English. It might sound silly, but it worked wonders. I would practice asking and answering common questions aloud. For example, I'd ask myself, "What did you do today?" and then answer, "I went to the grocery store and bought some vegetables." This helped me practice forming sentences without the pressure of talking to someone else. 6. Think in phrases, not words. One of the biggest breakthroughs for me was learning to think in phrases instead of individual words. Instead of translating word by word, I started recognizing chunks of language. For example, instead of thinking, "I am going to the store," I would think, "I'm going to the store." This made my speech more natural and fluid. 7. Practice with native speakers. I joined language exchange groups and met up with native speakers who wanted to learn my language. In return, they helped me practice English. These conversations pushed me out of my comfort zone and gave me real-world practice. The more I spoke, the more confident I became. Seeing the change, as I practiced these methods, I began to notice small improvements. Conversations that once felt impossible became manageable. I started understanding jokes and idioms, which made me feel more connected to people around me. My confidence grew, and I began to enjoy socializing. Opportunities that had seemed out of reach started to appear. I landed a job at a marketing firm, where my ability to think in English allowed me to collaborate with my colleagues effectively. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in New York. On a personal level, I even started dating a woman I met at a coffee shop. Our first conversation was a bit clumsy, but as I continued to think in English, our communication improved. She appreciated my effort, and it motivated me to keep going. Embracing opportunities, thinking in English opened doors I never thought possible. It wasn't just about mastering the language. It was about connecting with people and embracing the culture. New York City started to feel like the vibrant, exciting place I had always imagined. Looking back, I realized that the key to thinking in English was persistence. It's not an overnight transformation, but with consistent effort, it's achievable. The frustration I felt in the beginning was worth it because it led me to a life full of opportunities and connections. Final thoughts. If you're struggling to think in English, don't give up. It's okay to feel frustrated or overwhelmed at times. Remember that every small step you take brings you closer to fluency. Whether it's describing your day, talking to yourself, or practicing with native speakers, every effort counts. Thinking in English isn't just a skill, it's a mindset. Once you make the shift, you'll see the world in a whole new way. And who knows? Like me, you might find that learning to think in English unlocks a future full of possibilities.